Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us again for another installment of the RepPath Leadership Podcast Series. Today we have a special guest that we've been waiting to get on the show for a few months. So before I introduce him though, just want to go over today's topic and some housekeeping. Today's topic is mastering the interview and what the hiring manager really wants to know. So we're going to get great insights from one of our sales leaders today. And just guys, as some quick housekeeping, any questions that you have from this point on, please submit it to the chat. Our podcast producer, James, will field those questions. Then at about the halfway point, we'll address some of the questions that you guys compiled and be able to address as many as possible and answer as many as possible. Also, for some of you out there that are not subscribed to my podcast, to my YouTube channel, please make sure you subscribe to Unfiltered Medical Sales Coaching, because then you can get recordings of all the podcasts that we shoot for later on. So,
Joe, you forgot to add that we're also on all podcast platforms now. So anywhere you get your podcasts, you are officially on all podcast platforms. Can't forget that.
Yes, and thank you so much again for reminding me, James. And for any of you lobby members, please, everybody, please stay tuned. Not just lobby members, but I will give a promo code for any additional discounts for RepPath services. So please stay tuned and stick around for that. So again, just to jump right in, guys, excuse me, and introduce our guest today. Very excited to have Christopher Walker. We've been waiting for Chris again, like I said, for a few months to get on the show. So I'm excited. He's the VP of Sales at PhotoniCare. And Chris, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Joe. I'm very excited to actually get this going on a topic that I'm very passionate about. So I'm looking to help your audience out a little bit, if however I can with these questions. So
awesome. So before we dive into some of the questions, just give us a little bit of your background. You don't have to give us the interview approach, but just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what you're currently doing now.
Sure. So So starting out, I didn't really know what I wanted to do out of college, and I ended up in sales. I think like a lot of people do, and I started out in the business route. Did about 5 years in the B2B sales, 2 Fortune 100 companies, and then got my break into medical device sales. And so spent 10 years at Covidien, which is now part of Medtronic and their surgical division. And then I spent the last 10 years at Teleflex, which is based here in the Raleigh area, which is where I'm out of. Did everything from surgical to Latin America. And then I've spent the last 8 or so months in a startup. And so completely shifting gears out of the publicly traded companies down to a company of about 18 employees. So very different, exciting and challenging in a lot of new ways. And so, yeah, thrilled to be here.
Well, I think that's awesome too, because you provide a vast, array of perspectives, come from, big corporations to startups. I mean, everyone, because I know there's going to be a ton of questions about that, because everyone always thinks the grass is greener. So it'll be great to get your insights on, where are some of the challenges and opportunities on both sides, but we'll dig into that a little later. Just to start off, for a lot of these candidates, they're always concerned, of what really happens behind the scenes. They submit their resume and then it's kind of like, what goes on? What's the reality of what happens? So if you could just give us a little insight, it could be at PhotoniCare, it could be at your previous positions, but after a rep submits their resume, what exactly happens? We could say even in your current role, how does that process look so they know it doesn't just go into this abyss out there?
Yeah, so for my current role, it goes right to me because it's a very flat organization. So you have a high likelihood if you submit your resume to PhotoniCare, I'm going to receive it. I'm going to probably reach out to you. One of my previous mentors really instilled on me that candidate care is very critical. And unfortunately, in the world we live in, candidate care isn't always the highest priority of organizations. So I've always really from reaching out to every candidate, letting them know exactly where they were in the process, making sure they weren't left in that mystery land of what's happening. That's always been a very big part of how I address the process with each candidate. But I'd probably go back to my previous employers and say it depends on if you have an internal or external recruiter. It really starts there. A lot of companies, larger companies, do have an internal recruiting arm. And then if they can't find candidates through their network, they may go outside to external candidates. And so it's just important to understand kind of how a lot of these large companies work. What I would do typically is I would start out with an intake call with my recruiter. And so that'd be a recruiter assigned to that job requisition. We would talk about what I was looking for. But again, that's very much paper, right? This degree, maybe this experience, a certain amount. And as you know, it's hard to put somebody in an exact cookie cutter box. And then we would meet once a week and we would talk about the candidates that we were seeing. They would help with scheduling, with managing the process, getting people's calendars aligned so that they could go through the different stages. And so I think the challenging part, and one of the things that for me when I was in those larger companies, I would tell all of my recruiters I still wanted to see all of the resumes. And so we would not necessarily have formal interviews with everybody, post-screening call. But I didn't want any diamond in the rough to kind of squeak through the recruiter's eyes, because again, ultimately, I'd start out this whole conversation by saying, as a manager, your number one job is hiring a talent. If you don't do that well, you can't do number two well, which is to develop them. And so I would say that, I don't outsource that responsibility. I will have partners alongside of me, recruiter partners, but I don't ever want them to feel like they are the sole person, because ultimately that person is going to be a reflection of what my team is like, and moving forward.
So that's very interesting, because to be honest, I tell a lot of candidates, because if I post a job, I typically get anywhere from 300 to 500 applications. I mean, it's, how it is, Chris. It's crazy.
Yep.
The amount of resumes you get, which is a great thing. But we also know a lot of people apply that aren't qualified, and they're just throwing stuff out there and hoping it sticks. So
Sure.
I typically tell them, if you don't meet at least 60 to 70% of the requirements, don't waste your time, or more importantly, don't expect, because they get ghosted a lot. It's not to be disrespectful. It's just that there's too many other resumes to go through. So that's great, though, that you still are going into that, because you're still looking for that talent. Do you have any examples of what that quote unquote talent piece is that you can sometimes pops off a resume that hasn't met the list of requirements that you're looking for?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm allowed to save somebody's name, but the previous company, yeah, the last company I was just in, our head of HR, I'll leave it at that. One of the things that are, because I think everybody wants hard workers, we want learners, we want people with integrity and character, and those are the first three things that I really look for in a candidate, because a lot of the technical skills I can teach. I've been a sales trainer, I've been in marketing, I've been in sales, and so I have enough experience to teach somebody the technical or hard skills. But he said, don't go find people that want to join a great company. He said, that's easy. Everybody wants to join a great company. He said, find people that want to build a great company. And so things that stick out to me in a resume that beyond like the 103% to quota, et cetera, are part of this committee, part of that committee, selected to be this. And so I've always said, if I leave, like Teleflex still exists. They didn't close their doors when Chris Walker left, which is good. But I would hope that they felt something, that they felt a void when I left. And so I've always talked to my team, like, you want to make an impact, so that if you leave, it's not the end of the world, but you should have made an impact. And if you haven't, then the question is, what can I do to make an impact in my current role? And so I think that's what I'm looking for. Somebody that has something on their resume that shows that they're a builder. They're not just trying to latch onto a company, but they're really trying to make it better than when they first walk through those doors.
And I mean, that's great. And a lot of times, obviously, I can see that on the resume too, when they've been selected as like a regional trainer, or, they're typically, sometimes they're titles that aren't really a paid title, but they're still given more responsibility. Is there anything they can do, or you've seen reps do in the past, that exhibited that or showed those characteristics, showed leadership or like go-getter characteristics throughout the interview process that really like impressed you or left an impact?
Yeah. So I've hired and I wouldn't say it's on the resume, but I've hired a ton of people, and so I'm always leery to say like the best person I've ever hired because I don't want to make people feel bad. A person that I hired that does stick out for me in the hiring process came to the interview with a 70, 80-page binder. They had done research on all of our products, had done clinical study research, and so the first part I said was that what you should remember is that when you are in the interview process, you are in a sales process, especially if you're competing for a sales role. Okay. And so for the non-sales folks on this call, I'm going to speak from a sales perspective, but you should remember this is a sales call. And so what I'm looking for are the different behaviors in the process that are translatable to the actual job, right? Which is sales. And so are you pre-call planning? How are you conducting an in-office meeting with me? What are you doing post-call, right? Because there is a post-call. I'm shocked at how many thank yous I don't get anymore after interviews. It seems to almost be a dying art. I don't know if you're seeing that, but that for me has been a difference. But even pre-call planning, I think when you first reached out to me, I said one of my questions, so if you interview for me, I'll give you one tip is I'll ask, where did I work for prior to this job? And I would say 90% of the time they don't have a clue. And it's so easy to find me online, so you don't have an excuse there. But are you doing pre-call planning? Are you finding out who you're going to work for, who you're going to work for from a personnel, but also from a company standpoint? So are you doing research on the company? I think people that come well prepared and have that pre-call planning done well. And when you do those, by the way, then you're able to do some of the other things we'll talk about, which is asking good questions throughout the interview process and really showing me that you're not looking for a job, but you're looking for a career.
See, I love that. And I think a lot of reps, there's reps that get that they understand that this is almost like a tryout, for a sales call or a role play, and treat it that way, from start to finish. And I think the problem with I don't want to defend anyone for not sending a thank you because I think it's so easy to do and it's ridiculous, but I think people really do. They underestimate the competition that's out there. And a lot of times they think I'm such a great fit. No one has the credentials that I have. I'm almost a shoo-in anyway, so I won't send that thank you. But I guess they don't realize how important that is. Those little things, no matter how good you are, you still have to do all the little things well. I mean, like you said, doctor gives you a meeting, you don't send them a thank you or, appreciate, the collaboration. I mean, they're not going to use you too long.
Sure. Yeah. Well, no, I've likened interviews to first dates, right? You're trying to put your best face in it. And I was thinking about that analogy earlier today when I was prepping for this. And I said, it's kind of an unfair analogy. I actually don't want it to be a first date. I want you to be your authentic self and not have to, if you want ribs, go eat ribs, like you wouldn't do on a first date, but be your authentic self, because the reality is everyone's, gone through the interview process. And then day one, I just hired somebody, for example, the other day. She saw exactly who I am that first day, right? And so I don't want to mask that at all in the interview process and then, be somebody different, day one, and nor do I want you to be. And so I always say, interviews are kind of like first dates. What would I learn about you 6 months out from now? What are some of the areas that you do well? I'm a strength-based manager, so I'm going to always try to leverage your strengths. But what would I learn about areas that are developmental for you, whether they're organizational skills, prioritization, all of those things? And I think we do candidates an unfair advantage by trying to find the unicorn and then like looking for how shiny the diamond is, because there's things that we're all good at and there's things that we're not good at, and that's okay. That's human beings. So I'm trying to find out all the things I can about somebody, and also showing my authentic self to somebody when they're interviewing across from me.
And in doing that research, like you were saying, to find out, your previous position, like things that are pretty easy to do, and you can find it out quickly on LinkedIn. What about reaching out to other reps that work for you? How much of an advantage do you think that reps that do that reach out to a couple of your reps, get some insight, have over the reps that do not?
Yeah, great question. I think that They definitely gain an advantage because they better understand the company dynamics, right? They understand the good and bad, and there's good and bad in every company, right? There are going to be things you enjoy about your job and things you don't enjoy. And so I think, I like candidates that ask me, hey, are there two people that you can that I can reach out to? And so I would always recommend for anybody on this call, ask that question during the interview process. Say, are there two people, not one, two people? It's kind of like a field day. Like anyone can fake a 2-day field ride or a 1-day field ride, but it's hard to put 3 days together that are really compelling for your manager. Ask for 2 or 3 references because they're going to ask you for references. And so I think that shows that there's enough transparency in the organization to say, hey, we're full disclosure. Here are the things that are good and bad about the company. Here are the things that you'll enjoy working for Chris. Here are the things that will frustrate you, because there's good and bad for everything. So.
See, I think that's awesome, and that's very unique. But I think that's definitely the right approach because a lot of managers they seem to be like the Wizard of Oz, where you're not going to see me, not talk to me until you actually get the interview. And when I see the managers that take your approach, it just makes reps feel more comfortable, because they know what they're getting into. And I think it saves people a lot of time because if you're not a fit, why waste each other's time to try to fake something that you're not? And it's just only going to lead to a bad hire and frustrated people on both accounts.
Yeah, it's the last person I just hired recently. I said, look, you need to interview me too. This has to be. You could be great for us, but if we're not great for you, you'll leave us, right? And so it's got to be a two-way street. And I do think that is a part of the challenge in the interview process today. That I've experienced it. I'm sure anybody on this call has experienced it. Is kind of that level of transparency. And so what I will say is people I've interviewed with me will also say I'm a difficult interviewer. And so I will also tell you, I will walk through the house dispassionately. I don't want to buy this house is how I go through every interview process, because I also know salespeople are good at selling themselves because that's their profession. So you may not see a real smiley, bubbly Chris you would if you worked with me, but that's because I'm really trying not to get sold in the process. I really want to dig into the facts, so that I can make the best hire for that role. So I would say that I'm very, very transparent. You probably don't see the everyday Chris in an interview, just because I'm really trying to go, okay, what am I missing here? Because I can easily get sold. So, yeah.
So you're definitely, a lot of your interviews don't really get too conversational.
Little bit. Yeah. I mean, I've been coached well on the questions you can or cannot ask, and happy to answer any of those questions for people. But, things like, I just typically don't ask any personal questions. I'm not going to ask you. I'll even say things, but I will. But again, in full disclosure, I will say, hey, I can't ask you a lot of questions, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. How's that? And I will tell them, I'm happily married, 23 years, 3 kids, 1 year from empty nesting. So I do want them to understand who I am and kind of a little bit about me. But that's just my approach, and it hopefully shows them a side of a human side, through a sometimes inhumane process of having to compete for something.
Sure. So, some managers go by the mantra that if I like someone, that I get that feeling that I want to go and grab a beer after the interview. Do you really go by that, or is it just like that's really not so that important as opposed to how well they're fit, and you see if they really have honesty or any red flags that you think I don't trust what this individual is throwing out at me. What's your take with that?
Yeah, that's the thing that you can't, so I saw something on LinkedIn recently and it said, I just went through this whole process with this company. I didn't even get any feedback. These companies are awful. They won't give you feedback when and I posted bravely because I didn't know what the backlash I was going to get, because everybody was like, yeah, you fight. Yeah. And I said, but the reality is, like, we're coached as managers not to give you feedback. And so I do want to kind of unveil that to the audience, because we live in a very litigious society, and so anything that we say, well, I didn't say that, that wasn't. And so managers are coached not to give feedback, and trust me, managers, a lot of them want to give you feedback. And so it's unfortunate. I think it's a disservice. I wish it was a different way. I think if you're interviewing for an internal role, I absolutely think you should get feedback. But I think for external positions, I do think that there is, unfortunately, a standard that has kind of been set by what the best HR practice is. What I would say though is, to your question, I've heard the phrase, can I spend 3 days in a car with them? Especially if you're a frontline manager, you're often doing field rides with your sales team. And so chemistry is part of it, right? We're human beings, we're conversational. Salespeople are certainly conversational. And so I think there's a chemistry component to it, but I'm always going to hire the best person for the job. So if I feel like they are, meet the requirements of that territory, and I think that's another thing, is that what might work in one region may not work for another region. What may work for one territory within a specific region may not work in that same territory if it was a different type of territory. And so as managers, I think the first thing we're thinking through, if you're good at your job and experience, you say, let me think about the makeup of the customers in this territory. What is it going to take to be successful? And then you build kind of that persona of what you're looking for, which may look very different in New York City than it does in California, right? And so I think, those are the things that I think good managers are thinking through. And yeah, I think chemistry is a part of it. I do think that is true. But I'm also thinking, what on my team don't I have? And so as we diversity is obviously a very big topic in the workplace. And I've likened diversity to, and this is going to be a weird analogy, but to stables and horses. And so I grew up riding horses, and some of the toughest horses to ride were some of the most fun ones to ride, but they took an experienced rider. And so I think as you advance in your career as a manager, it's your job to become a better manager. You need to invest in the academics of what management and leadership is all about. And your stable should look diverse. It should have all different types of behaviors, all different types of experiences, all different types of hard skills and soft skills, because when you have that together, then as a manager, you have a team that it's fun to manage because it's not all the same cookie cutter person, but also there may be projects or things that your team is tapped for, and you'll be like, that's a perfect one for so and so, or that's a perfect project for so and so. And so for me, I'm a strong believer in that. I think that I've always kind of thought, and so if somebody comes to me and says, hey Chris, I'm hiring for my team, what are your thoughts on, I'll be like, what do you need? Right. And that should be kind of where we start, is what do you need for your team? Like, tell me about the territory, tell me about the region, tell me about the whole team. I just went through this with a buddy of mine, my previous company was hiring for, he said, I'm going to hire this guy and he's got the lowest amount of experience, but I do think he would be the right fit. And I said, well, tell me about the rest of your team. There's 20-year, 30-year vets. Okay, you can take on a project. That's perfect. That'll challenge you and, help you as a manager grow and develop and stuff like that. So all of those things I think are factors in kind of the candidate selection, process.
I love that. I love the analogy with the stable. We talked about that in the past.
Yeah.
I've stolen that from you a few times, just letting
Nice.
you know. But so let's talk about when you actually get the resume. So you're a perfect person to dispel some of these myths that are out there, because you see all the resumes pretty much that are coming, through the application process. I get this all the time. Joe, AI is killing me. My resume isn't AI friendly, and that's why I'm not getting any responses. So for someone that's seeing all these resumes, what in those first 30 seconds when you get the resume, what's really jumping out at you from a great candidate versus, an average candidate?
Yeah, the type of companies that people have worked for. My best advice that I got coming out of college was from my stepfather, and he said, go to a company that people have heard of. Go to a blue chip company. Get your, why? Because they're going to train you well, right? They're going to invest in you. They're not going to give you a phone book and say, smile and dial, right? They're going to actually invest in you. And so I did that. I went to Verizon, which was a Fortune 10 company at that time. And so I think the pedigree of the companies is important a little bit. But one of the things, and I know this is not as popular, but I also look at tenure. And I look at tenure because one of the things I look for is change agility. And so what I fear, what I get concerned about when I look at a resume that's 1.5 years, 8 months, 6 months, but I was the rep of the quarter one, so don't put rep of the quarter, don't care. But I look for consistency, and anyone can have a great first year, but can you have multiple good years? I also think, I took martial arts for most of my adolescence. And the reason why the black belt is the highest, because everybody back then started out with a white belt and it got dirty over time and experience and wisdom and all of that. And it turned dark and it turned black, right? There wasn't, now you can be a 6-year-old black belt, which is also wrong. And so there's something to mastery. And so it's hard for me to say like this person really mastered what they were doing in 6 months or 8 months or 1.2 years. So I'm looking for kind of consistency in somebody that may be built. But I'm also not I don't necessarily look for promotions, because there are some people that want to be a sales rep. They want to be the best sales rep, and they don't want to be in management, and that's okay. I love people that are very comfortable and know exactly what they want. And so I'm not necessarily looking for promotion or doing additional things. It depends on the level. But if we're talking sales reps, what I am looking for though is some grit and some stick-to-itiveness in a company, because I hear stories of like, well, they did this or they changed the comp plan. I said, yeah, and that can happen at every company. So like, are you going to leave if I hire you?
Right, right. And so when you're talking about tenure, is there a certain timeline that you have in your head, like anything less than 1.5 years, 2 years, or is it just that continued, 4 or 5 jobs all 1.5 years? If you could dive a little deeper into that.
Yeah. So when I would look at resumes, just to let the audience know so I'm like, wow, they've been at 5 places since I've been at this one place. And so again, and I'm not saying that the norm anymore is being 20, 30 years at a company. That I certainly know that that's not the norm. I would say that, if you're going to have so I would say 2 to 3 is probably the shortest I'd want to see for a sales rep. What I would say is that if you don't have that, and it's typically what you've done, you did what I'm doing right now, which is you went to a startup and it didn't work out and they lost their funding or they got acquired, and then so just make sure your story makes sense and lines up. And so I would say, part of it is how your story kind of plays out. Things happen. So I would never, but if if you were at 10 startups that didn't work out over the course of 10 years, I'd be like, this person's judgment or decision quality or something is not very good.
Right. You got to learn your lesson at some point.
Yeah.
So besides the tenure, are there any other red flags on a resume that jump out at you?
Yeah. So I mean, I've seen misspellings. I'm probably the worst, and you can talk to people that work for me, especially some of the functions that work for me. Like I'm very big on like grammar, and so like if you have like periods after some bullets and not other bullets, like so have people look at your resume. Have somebody who's very OCD, majored in English, look at your resume just to make sure that it looks professional. I also heard a stat, and I don't know if there's any stats that you've heard, but the 85% of the stuff on resumes are embellished or made up. And so, rather than like, we did this together, it was I did everything versus, and so I would say to you, I don't put a lot of stock in the stuff on the resume. In fact, I would hire somebody, and I'll do this all the time when I go to like a restaurant or a bar, and I just see somebody who's I can just see as a hard worker, great communicator, great salesperson. I'm like, I can make them a good sales. So I am a big fan that anyone can do sales. I was, wanted to be in the FBI, so I didn't end up doing what I thought I was going to do in college. So you can do sales if you have certain qualities, I think, and some of the other stuff can be taught. So I'm always looking for talent. I would always hire talent over a position player if we're using a draft analogy every day of the week.
Right. That's awesome. That's awesome. And when it comes to tailoring your resume, because I get this a lot too, Joe, I've applied to, or they'll send me a resume and they'll say, they'll explain something on their resume, whether the position they were in. And I'm like, I don't see that. I don't know what you're talking about. They're like, oh, which resume did I send you? And you're like, okay, well, that's a red flag, because especially if you have your marketing resume, your sales resume, your leadership resume. And I get that. And it's like, guys, you gotta pick a lane of who you are at some point. But I understand you want to tailor it towards the actual opening. So what is your advice with that? So before it gets too out of control, where you have 50 different versions of your resume, how important is that to tailor it to what the company's looking for in the requirements?
Yeah, so I guess the question would be, is it all within the same ladder, we'll call it? So sales leadership. So I have a different one for director of sales jobs, VP of sales jobs. Where do I have a marketing, sales, and training, and because I could have all three of those. I've done all three of those, and I've enjoyed all three of those. So if I was unemployed tomorrow, I would be in that position where I would ask myself, okay, do I want to go into a marketing role? Probably not. Do I want to do training? Probably not. So do I want to do sales? Yes. Now, would I be open to director or RSM roles? Yeah, absolutely. Leadership is leadership. I mean, one's smaller, bigger. I enjoy just being in front of customers. So even when I was considering leaving my last, company, I said, look, I don't want to be stuck behind a desk. I really need to be in a position where I can be in the field close to the customer, because that makes me satisfied. In that role, some days I'm an RSM, some days I'm a rep, some days I'm head of sales, some days, and so that's been very fulfilling for me. So I would say that what you can do is you can have a leadership based resume. I don't know if objectives are out or in on resumes, but if you were applying for a VP of sales role, yes, that should look different than an RSM role, as far as the objective maybe, but leadership is leadership, right? And so if you've driven teams to I think one of the things that's hard is once you get to a vice president role, no one will talk to you about an RSM role or director role. They're like, well, why, what's wrong with this guy? He's broken. So that's, I think, challenging, but I do think that, leadership is leadership. And there's different seasons of your life where you want different things. And so, I think knowing yourself and what you want will help to minimize the number of resumes. So maybe that's more of a coaching with Joe session on, okay, I know you can do it all, but let's kind of focus in on really what's going to be fulfilling for you. What's going to get you out of bed every day and make you excited to do your job? It goes back to the question of, can you motivate your reps? And I have my own opinion, and the answer for me is no. I believe I'm always trying to hire people that are motivated in life. That, as my father-in-law, when I was dating my wife, said, "Is he a goer?" And I was like, "Goer?" And yeah, is he a goer in life or not? And so I've always held on to that. I'm trying to find goers. Now I can demotivate people quickly if I manage them improperly and stuff like that. But I am looking for people that are motivated. And so part of that is in the interview process saying, okay, what motivates this person, and does this job align to that? And if the answer is no, they want to be, working from home, and this is a 100% field-based job, then no, that would be miserable. Or I don't want to travel. Great, you have the whole western part of the United States. So I've always said, one of the things that I've tried to do for myself, but also people I mentor, is take 2 pieces of paper, write down all the things you're good at and you're not good at, all the things that you want in a job and that you don't want in a job. And if those 2 left-hand columns match up, you're going to be probably in a pretty motivated state throughout your work day. And so I would probably say, if somebody had different resumes, going back to the question, I would say, let's start out with why do you have them? First of all, walk me through your thought process. And if there are different bullets that make sense to have, then great. But the reality is, the most meaningful actions that you took in each of those roles would probably apply to any leadership role, regardless of the type of role you're going for. If it's an individual contributor role, then that might be a little bit different, right? I think there is a difference between the verbiage in a resume for individual contributors as it is for a leadership role. And so for reps, for example, when I said, I don't want to see like, you did 103. I want to actually see, who did you help get to 103? Who did you mentor? So I want to see that. But if you're a leadership role, applying for leadership role, I don't know why you would need 2 resumes personally, but I could be wrong.
Well, and getting back to your point with the objection, I'm not a big fan of objections on resumes anymore, but if you are going to put it, I always suggest to keep it as a leadership description, not a regional sales manager, a district sales manager, or a VP, because you do pigeonhole yourself into different roles. We know that those titles are interchangeable at every company. So a regional sales manager at a big company can technically work with more, guide more people than at a smaller company as a VP.
Yep.
So I just, that's the one thing with that. I'm not against objectives, excuse me, but I just always want them to be a little bit more open-minded when they're putting them, so they don't get themselves pigeonholed.
That's fair.
But while we're just looking at the time, James, we're going to take a quick break and see if there's any questions from the crowd that Chris can address.
We got a couple questions from multiple platforms, so let's get into it. We got Jennifer Holloway. I built a strong career in sales, especially in the oil field and industrial sectors, but consistently driving results through relationship building, grit, and hunter mentality. I've since completed medical sales college to gain clinical and OR experience, and I'm now making the transition into medical device sales. I know I may not interview like someone who's been in the industry for years or has a bachelor's degree, and I may not always come across as polished in interviews. But in the field, there's no, it cuts off. I don't know what you're getting at.
Maybe, but in the field, it's kind of all the same. Maybe a sales. I don't know. Jennifer, I would say that very few people, especially my age, started out in medical device. There are a few that I've met throughout my career. Most people, I mean, the phrase when I started was, work for 2 B2B companies, get 5 years experience, and then parlay that into medical device if you want to get a medical device. And so that was kind of the norm, at least when I was getting into it. I agree. I also am biased. I would love to hire somebody with a B2B background just because they know how to prospect well. They know, about persistence and all of that, and the hunter mentality. I think sometimes, and this isn't everybody obviously, but I do think sometimes in sales and medical device we get lazy. And what I mean by that is we see ourselves more as like a service or part of the clinical team. And I remember one of the managers when I was in training at Covidian, he said, "Look, I sent you this bloodthirsty rep, that's going to go sell, and then you hand me back a doctor." And so, he said, "I want the rep, I want the person that I gave you, but also trained like a doctor." So I think, Jennifer, my guidance to you would be, if you haven't found something, certainly connect with me on LinkedIn, connect with Joe, connect with other people that have a good network in this industry. They can help to steer you and provide guidance on things that maybe they've seen in your resume. I'm not the best on resumes, but I know Joe is very good at all those types of coaching and stuff like that. But get to know the managers, the hiring managers that are looking for people. And what I've always said in med device, you have a couple different routes. You can go the distributor route, like Medline, Cardinal, Owens & Minor, McKesson. Really good way to kind of break into medical distribution. You can go into, especially with the medical sales college experience, you can go in as an associate rep in ortho. Anytime you see the word associate, though, ask, does this position require relocation? And most of the time, at least the companies I've worked for, the answer is we are going to require relocation. And I've had people who have taken jobs as associates because they really want to get their foot in the door, weren't really relocatable, and you will shoot your brand down if you do not relocate. So if you are relocatable, know where you are relocatable to. At least be fair and say, look, I'm relocatable, but not everywhere. I would be relocatable to these regions. But yeah, I wish you the best. I've always also, a couple other things I'd say, take an A&P class in a community college. I know it sounds like a weird recommendation, but I'm a big fan of knowing medical language. And if you're going to go head to head with a clinician in the OR or on the floors when we're talking to nurses, you need to know your stuff. And so this is a different level of preparedness. I remember I bought a surgical in Agustin, that is the person who wrote South Beach Diet, so it wasn't him, Sabiston surgical manual, and I read that thing cover to cover. And so for me, invest in yourself right now. So if you're in the process, you're trying to find it, don't wait until you get the job. Start investing in your knowledge so that when you do sit down, you can say, these are all the things I've done to prepare myself it's not just about going to the sales college. That's great. That's a great first step. But what other things are you doing so that when you get the experience, you're going to be able to fly through training because you've already put that work in to prepare yourself.
Real quick, I got the rest of the question. You kind of answered it, but you said she doesn't come across as polished in interviews, but in the field, I thrive, I build trust, I close businesses, and I keep the patient's best interest at the center of everything. I do everything I do. Based on your experience, what qualities or indicators do you look for that tell you someone will succeed in the role, even if they don't have a traditional background?
Yeah, I mean, sales is great. Sales and waiting tables. I love people also from the hospitality industry. I did that throughout college. I'm looking for somebody that can connect with people quickly. So that's great to hear that you have that already, Jennifer. I'm also looking for people that ask. So my number one skill set, Jennifer, is asking good questions. If you come to me and say, I want to be a better sales rep, I'll be like, ask more good questions. The reality is, and unfortunately, this thing has made us lazy because we have every answer at the tip of our fingertips. And so the art of asking good questions to me is dying. And I see it even in my children. They're less curious than I was when I was their age. And so I think, understanding how to ask good open-ended questions, how to double click or ask deeper questions, and really be interested. And you can practice this throughout your life every day. Next party you go to, just strike up a conversation, ask a question, then ask a follow-up question. You'll know their name, their PIN numbers for their bank accounts, their blood type. They won't even know your name. People are willing to give up information. You just need to ask. And people want to talk about themselves. So I would say, continue to refine that area of your, if that is an area, Jennifer, that you need to double down on the clinical knowledge. And then I would say network the heck out of the people who know this industry well. Joe's a great one to start with. And so I would say, start to get tapped into the people that are tapped into these companies. And it'll happen. And I will also say, guys, I love interviewing. I've interviewed a ton of people. I've not gotten every job I've gotten. And so I would also tell you, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some. And I will tell you the ones I didn't get, something was better around the corner. And so also know that, have faith that the interviewer is also doing exactly what I'm saying I'm doing, which is I'm trying to see, are you the right fit for this role? And you may have dodged a bullet because maybe this wasn't the best fit for you. And you're disappointed and you're like, I can't believe I didn't do it. But maybe you shouldn't have gotten it, and it was the best thing for you.
And just to address one thing, just because I got a text from one of the viewers, anyone that did have a question on when Chris said an A&P class, that's anatomy and physiology. Just for anyone else that had that question, because I just got a text. I just wanted to say that. Thank you, though, Chris.
Yes. There's a lot of acronyms in our industry, so I apologize.
I'm learning that as I read the questions myself. Next question from Min Own. How does the interview process differ if you have sales experience versus if you don't?
Yeah, and this is the catch-22, and I'm sure Joe hears this a lot. Like, everyone's saying I need sales experience, but I need sales experience in order to get sales. Wait, I need a sales job in order to get the thing. So, and the answer is exactly what I said before. There are plenty of people that will hire people without sales experience. And if you think it's med device first, there are opportunities. It's usually in the form of a sales associate, but not always. Sometimes they still want to see 1 to 2 sales experience, and there's a relocation. So I would go back to what I said, how I started. I would go to a Cintas, an Aramark, a UniFirst, a ADP or Paychex. I mean, these are blue chip companies that have been doing it for a long time. They are successful companies and they invest and train their people. And you may find doing that, you're like, I don't want to go to a medical device company. I'm happy. I've tried to get ADP people. I've tried to get Cintas people. I'm like, I'm happy. I'm not going anywhere. But what I will say is you will get a great training. You will understand how to prospect. You will understand how to ask good questions. You will learn how to close. And you also learn really quickly if sales is really the right field for you to go into. And so it's something that's really, I think, I would coach somebody, especially like my kids who are getting that age, do it while you're young, see if you like it. It's not for everyone. I also, just like the serving analogy, I want to say despise, that's a strong statement, but if you're going to be in the profession, treat it like an art. Be a student of sales. When somebody serves me, like I did fine dining, and so I know what good looks like, right? And I know what it's supposed to look like. people can make a lot of money, so a lot of people do it, but they do it wrong. And so I'm always looking for somebody who is investing in themselves. I'll give this out to the group. It's something I gave to one of the nurses on my team who transitioned into a sales role. She's now my top rep. Has been doing it for 6 months, sales. But I said the first sales book I ever read was called The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. It is a short novel that talks about the heart of what a salesperson should be. So it should not be this, sleazy salesman, press hard 3 copies. It's really about your heart and wanting to serve other people. And if you come into this profession with that, and you continually invest in yourself and your development, you're going to do great things. If you don't, it'll be short-lived, and your brand and reputation will be what it is in front of the different customers that you interact with. But and so that book was, I think, transformational for me starting out.
Just to add one before we move on, James, to piggyback off what Chris was saying, for some of you guys out there that do not have sales experience, there's typically transferable skills that you can show or illustrate no matter what position you were at previously. For instance, in terms of, we talked about the service industry, people that were waiters and bartenders, they got good communication skills. A lot of times they have to upsell. We were always taught that when I was a waiter.
Oh, yeah.
You want to upsell on the menu, get them to buy an appetizer, get them to get that dessert, get them to buy a second drink. So there's a lot of transferable skills, especially for teachers. They're presenting a lot. So think of those, whatever position you're in. It may not be sales in your mind, but there's usually always a way to correlate and tie those transferable skills to a medical sales role.
100%. Yeah, I always find it interesting when I see somebody like, oh, I can never do sales, and I'm like, I don't know that. So I would say, why? And again, there are some valid reasons. Like I'm not disciplined. So what you should be is, I'm not disciplined. I'm not a self-starter. I'm not and some of those things I don't think anybody would self-admit. But I think a lot of people have this perception, especially in medical devices, that it's some like press hard 3 copy sleazy role. And I'm like, that's not it at all. Your role in med device is to be a trusted advisor to the clinicians that you serve. If I could say one sentence, you should be a trusted advisor to the clinicians that you serve. And if you're doing that, there's nothing, I didn't say anything about selling, I didn't talk, but it requires you to be good. And so if you have a psych degree like I do, bachelor's, and I'm talking to somebody who's got 15 letters after the name, I can't do that with what I learned in college. I actually have to invest in myself and be better than if I was selling a car on a car lot, or if I was waiting a table. I have to be the best version of myself, which means, and the company's not responsible to give it to you, by the way. That's the other thing I would say. They're gonna give you the permit and the license to drive, but you need to invest in yourself if you really want to be the best.
Awesome.
All right. After an interview, when should you follow up? Right after, a couple hours later, or the next day?
Man, I'm almost going to like defer to Joe on this one. So here's what I would say to you, more than the timing. Okay. I do think urgency is critical, because I do think, depending on, like, if you're talking to me, I've made up my decision pretty quickly. I would say more than the timing of it is the quality of the follow-up. In other words, if you just send me a quick thank you, I'm so excited about this, look forward to hearing from you, not going to happen. If you're the only one, it might happen. But if you say things like, I really enjoyed our conversation about this, it really stuck out to me because of these reasons. And so I want you to actually, again, sales process equals interview. You wouldn't just say, thank you for your time, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, I look forward to hearing from you. No, you would say, I really enjoyed it. I think this product is going to do X, Y, and Z. I look forward to the next steps of this. Like you would be more robust in your follow-up. And so I would say that would be my expectation, is that it's specific and not generic. You're not sending like a get well card. You're sending a professionally worded thank you follow-up to me that recaps or discusses what we talked about in the interview process. And excitement is fine. You can certainly say you're excited about it. I would say timing, usually for me, it's usually that same day, but I usually, I'm like the end of the day, kind of like, because I've had such a busy day, even though I've been wanting to send it all day, but I purposely wait. But I was also the guy that called the girl the same day. So I'm not the guy that you should talk to. I would tell you that, you use your own discretion, but I would say sooner is better, because I can also tell you if you wait too long, they'll be like, they didn't even send a follow-up. And then it's like comes like 2 days later, and it's like, well, did they just think about it, or did they get coaching on it? And so again, you have to kind of like war game it out in your own head as to what the hiring manager is thinking. So I would say same day is preferable. Be meaningful more than time sensitive.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. I think in terms of of setting the expectations in the interview, like there's one that Chris is talking about, a thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong. You
Yeah.
want to respond that day, but if they say to you, "Hey, Joe, we still have a couple more minutes to interview," when you want to make sure that you get the understanding of what the next steps are and what the process is. Find out from that manager and just say, "Hey, okay, so what is the next step? Oh, I'm going to bring three reps back to meet with my vice president next week. So we should have an answer by next Tuesday on who's coming back." You want to dig deeper and try to get a better understanding, so it's not so open-ended. So then I think that's where they get confused, Chris, and like left there not knowing really what the next step was. And I think that's the bigger problem. So then they go, do I wait? That's where like the dating thing comes in. Like, well, I just went out with her on Saturday. Now I call her back 3 days from now, 5 days from now. I want to be cool. I don't want to be desperate. So that's where a lot of the uncertainty comes in.
Yeah, I think that I'll apologize on behalf of all companies. Not that I can do that, but the process is broken. I'll just say the process is broken. There isn't great follow-up. It often isn't when they said they were going to. I would say that 90% of my interview interactions, the candidate care was 100% lacking. And so that only emboldens me to make that experience better for people I'm interviewing, to give them that time, because we've all been through it on the other end. And so I don't understand why it's like that. I just think people are so caught up in their day-to-day job that they this is kind of like the back burner. It's not urgent. I'll get to it when I can get to it. But then I go back to every new person or person I mentor that's in a new manager role. I said, your number one job is talent scout. Your number one job is hire well. And so if that's your number one job, then you can't leave candidate care at the very bottom. You have to actually, like, people have to feel wanted, right? They have to feel, now using a TV analogy, I'll say, listen, this is like The Bachelor. I'm going to tell you all I love you, but I have one rose. And so the reality is that is the unfortunate part. And I've been on the situations where I've had to interview, really good internal candidates. And that's really tough as a hiring manager, because you're going to have to break up with somebody and they're top talent, right? And they work for the company. And so then you have to worry about, okay, now I just took a top talent, and now are they a flight risk? Are they and so I think, so also just understand, hiring isn't easy for the hiring manager all the time, because there's a lot of dynamics that we have to think about. Okay, if I hire this person, that person's gonna be mad. They may leave. And so there's even some companies that don't even let those people get in the race, because they don't want to have to put them in that position down the road. They know they're not ready. And you probably all are thinking about this in your, where they said, look, that person wasn't even allowed to hire. Yeah, probably because of that, because I didn't want them to go through the whole process knowing that that wasn't what they were looking for, just so that they can make them feel awful at the end of the interview process. And so I think that's probably a humane thing to do to somebody. The downside is that then they'd get no feedback. They don't get the experience of the interview process. And so there is some downside to it, but I can understand from a hiring manager's perspective why they would want to do that.
All right. We have from Min Own. What are some examples of questions you shouldn't be asking during the interview, like asking about what the day today is like?
So a couple. So I would say that some of the questions I get a lot more nowadays is work-life balance. How like how much time should I be in the office? All of those things. So like kind of like the work conditions. I think those are all fair. I'll give you my answer on work-life balance, because it seems to be coming up a lot more. And I think it's a fair question, but I told one candidate, I said, look, I'm going to give you a really weird answer, which is I don't believe in it. And she looked at me kind of funny, and I said, most of the work-life balance issues are self-regulation issues, not a bad manager who's asking you to do stuff at 11 o'clock at night. And so I think a lot of work life, because that's important, right? We all want, if you have kids or you have a family, I think the work situation is very different than it was when our grandparents were working. And so we want to have everything, right? We want the job, we want the work experience, but we also want to have a family. We want our kids to not shout stranger when we walk through the door. And so I think the work-life balance is a good one, but I would also tell you it requires a level of discipline on your part and a prioritization and time management on your part. That's the company's not going to do it for you. Things are going to keep streaming at you. It started actually with BlackBerry, if you remember those things. But that's when we had email on our hips, right? Yeah, on our hips. But it started there, and it just hasn't stopped, right? It's only gotten more, in our face. And so I would say, questions around that type of stuff are kind of like, why is that the main question you're asking me? And it's not that it's a bad question, it's just that it doesn't have anything to do with really the job. I want you to ask more questions around, the expectations I have for the role. What does if we're talking a year from now, what are some of the things that would have been delivered or completed within that year? What are some of the best reps that you have? What are some of the things that they're doing that the other reps aren't doing, right? If we're talking about a sales rep role, I want you to really mastermind so that I see that you're thinking about the role and trying to fit yourself in that expectation or that requirement, not asking about how many weeks of vacation do we have, what's your policy on how often we have to be in the office. Those things are way down the road. And so I also think there's a time and a place. So one of the questions I know, Joe, you wanted to cover was salary. I addressed that very first thing. This is what not like, hey, my name's Chris, by the way. No, I don't do that. But I don't think there should be anything mystical about comp. I think it should be something that's fairly open. I mean, you know what you need to make in order to sustain your life or to be happy or excited about the role. And so I don't know why a hiring manager would pull that back. Moreover, one of the things that frustrates me then at the end of the process is if you then ask, so I say the job is $100,000 job and you come back, great, I need 150K. And we're at the very end of this process. And I almost want to just be like, sorry, pass, just goodbye. Yeah. So I already told you what it was. I was very open and honest. So I think asking questions like that at the end, when we've already set the expectations, like, well, he'll want to pay me what I'm asking because I'm going to be walking on water to work. No, it's $100,000. That's what it is. It hasn't changed. So I would say things like that, Min, would be also things that are out of bounds, asking questions that you already have the answer to, or just in the negotiation part of the interview that just rubbed me the wrong way. Day to day, you should absolutely know. You should know what it's like. So I think those are very fair. Yeah. Back in the day, we used to bring reps into the OR and all of that, and then we had vendor credentialing, and so now you can't do any of that stuff. But yeah, that was standard practice. Was we want you to spend time with a rep from our company so that you can see what a day to day looks like.
All right. We have Ivan Kalunga. When is a great time to mention a referral to a hiring manager during the interview process?
So I think you mean like references, and I'll just assume that's what you mean. But as far as references, I'm going to ask you for those at the end of the interview. So it will be, please provide me 2 or 3 references. And so I wouldn't necessarily bring that out in the interview, Ivan. I would say it's more, unless it was somebody that was referring you. I'll rephrase my answer, since maybe that's what you're asking, which is if somebody's referred you to the company, then before you apply to that company, just as a FYI, there are often ways for that employee to get credit in their internal system. So if you're getting referred by somebody internally, stop, don't interview. Like I know at Teleflex, I actually had to be the one that did something on my end first. And so I'd be like, oh, you interviewed or you applied already. Oh, no, I knew the people well, so that could get connected. But what I would tell you is, understand what their referral policy is for the person referring you, and then let them drive that process for you. It'll already be tied to the record. A lot of these companies have, some type of HR software that connects all of those things. So And if it was refer or references, then I would say a good hiring managers are going to ask for that because that's a part of the process, and they'll ask for at the end. You don't need to have it on your resume. You don't need to have it. I'll get it from you later.
Cool. All right. So we have you mentioned earlier it's like a first date, but also say that you only care about facts and would rather not get too personal. Is that manager dependent, or is there a general guideline to follow?
Yeah, and when I say too personal, I will absolutely share personal stuff on my life. So I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying is that there are questions that are out of bounds, illegal questions for hiring managers to ask interviewees. And so what I would say is I'm not gonna be super emotional and I'm known to be a little funny around the office and stuff like that. So I'm not going to be that person in an interview process because I'm more serious, Chris, because this is a serious thing. We're trying to find somebody that's going to help, improve our sales or marketing or whatever I'm hiring for. And so, like I said, the advice was always when you see a house or you walk through a house, you don't go, "Oh my gosh, this is beautiful. We love it." No, you want to kind of hold your emotion back because you're not trying to give the seller a leg up to say, "No, we're not going to concede on any pricing or anything like that." And that's kind of how I think about the interview process. And I'm walking through the house, dispassionate. I'm looking at the facts, if you want to call them that. But yeah, I would say to you, kind of, I know we're closing on the hour here, but the best advice if I could only give you one piece of advice is don't let the process paralyze your personality. Okay. And that's the same with role plays. If you're doing sales role plays or interviews, don't let the process paralyze your personality. I want to hire you. And so don't try to be somebody different in the interview process. Be yourself. And if that lands well with what I'm looking for, great. If it doesn't, then that's okay. There will be somebody that you will, click with in another, yeah.
All right. One more question. Out of curiosity, what advice would you give to someone who has been at an executive level NSD VP, but wants to transition into frontline leadership or individual contributor role?
Yeah, great question, Brian. I haven't quite cracked that yet. I would tell you that when I was looking at Telefix, I spent the last 4 years there working as the head of Latin America as the VP of sales. And part of that, I was getting a lot of recruiters saying, "Hey, you need to make your way back to the US. Like you've never left physically, but you're kind of an expatriate." And I was like, man, in my 40s, I can't afford to be irrelevant. I've never even worked in the US since COVID. So I was like, all right, I need to start thinking about that. And Brian, that was a big question mark. So people would look at my resume and they're like, "Well, you're applying for a director role or RSM role." I'm like, I don't really care. I love frontline leadership. I love talking to customers. I don't want to be behind a desk. That was the most draining part of that job in Latin America, was being so desk tied because I didn't live there. And so, yeah, unfortunately, Brian, I think for me, it came down just, internal networking, knowing somebody who got my resume in front of somebody that was looking. But no, I had a lot of people scratching their head going, why are you sitting here? There were a couple jobs I looked at and they just didn't either buy my story or they were just wondering why was I jumping or yeah. So in full disclosure, being very candid, I don't have the answer for you. Talk to Joe. He'll maybe have
I
a
can
different
answer
answer.
that is a tough one, Chris. You're right. And Brian, I think the best thing you can do, and sometimes the stars have to align. When you can really, illustrate your relationships, those therapeutic areas, especially if you are going from a leadership role back to an individual contributor. I've seen ex-managers or directors that wanted to go back. I mean, they wanted to go back for multiple reasons because of family and quality of life. They didn't want to travel as much. But the ones that were able to get those rep roles again were because they had relationship in cardiology or in pain, or in anesthesia, where the company said, wow, this guy does still, have a wealth of knowledge in this space. He could be an asset for us. So that seems to be a transitional factor that comes into play where people are able to go back. So I would really highlight, basically who in those different specialties, because that sometimes can make the difference. But it's like Chris said, it's not the easiest because a lot of times they're very skeptical. Like, why are you really going back?
And maybe even threatened. Like, I don't want another VP coming in and questioning what I'm doing. And is this guy going to be a soldier or is he going to be a challenger? And so for me, it's always been, I've enjoyed my resume is like, this, then training, then this, then channel marketing. So for me, it's always been about impact and fun. If I'm having fun at what I'm doing and if I'm be able to make an impact, I don't care about title. And so, and some people, they really want to climb the ladder, and that's important, and that's great too. It's just knowing yourself. And then, like Joe said, if you have the network align those stars for you, then, you'll have somebody that can take a chance. But I would say, one of the things that people don't do enough is network. They wait until they have a need, and then they start to think about that. Conversely, frontline managers don't do enough bench interviewing. They wait until they have a vacancy and then they start thinking about it. And so I would tell you, as a frontline manager, if you're on this call, you need to be interviewing all the time. You need to be wearing that talent scout hat every time, right? Because you might have a person get promoted, leave, get fired, whatever, retire. And so your best decisions are going to be candidates that you've talked to over the course of months, if not years. Okay. Then it's a natural progression into the role. Similarly, and that's just my own opinion, similarly, if you are an employee and you need a job, a certain portion of your week should be around networking and LinkedIn. When it first started, I'm sure you remember, Joe, but it was like this, oh my gosh, he's on LinkedIn, he's looking for a new job. It was like, you couldn't even everything was like private, because people thought if you were on LinkedIn, you were gonna, you were looking for a job. And now it's just known that no, this is about personal branding, building your brand and the network. And so no one thinks twice anymore. But I remember when it first started, it was like this dirty word that you were on LinkedIn. And so, yeah, I think spend some time, making sure your profile looks good. Talk to people that are expert in it. If you're not expert in it, talk to people that are expert in it, because it's your brand. It is a representation of yourself.
And I think that's great, Chris. And this has been, just because we're getting over time. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to send them to either me or Chris. But to make it easier, just so we don't bombard Chris because he has a full-time job, you could send them to me, and I can always collaborate with Chris to get you the answers that you guys need. Chris, I gotta thank you again, man. This was awesome. As always, every time we speak, I leave with something that I'm going to steal from you again. But seriously, I did. I left with a lot of great information, great feedback, and I'm sure, I can tell by the number of questions on this call that everybody on the call was really impressed. So thank you again for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining and taking time out of your day. So
thank you, guys. And just again, before we go off, remember, anybody, please, if you didn't already subscribe to my YouTube channel, Unfiltered Medical Sales Coaching. We're on multiple platforms now for if you want to view this podcast and future podcasts, for iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple TV. I mean, there's a host of them, including YouTube and LinkedIn. Also, any one-on-one coaching or future coaching, whether you're trying to break in or advancing your career, obviously that's what we offer at RepPath. Please reach out to me. The promo code for today's call for all lobby members and anyone else on the call is very simple. It's just Chris's last name, Walker. So whenever you reach out to me, please submit the code Walker, and that'll get you additional discounts. So thank you guys again. Hopefully you could join us, every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Thanks again to Chris, and we'll talk soon, guys. Have a great day.